Yo, what's going on, everyone? This is Shields, and today we're going to be looking and reacting to the video we did. I believe a couple days ago we did the Disney ranking every ride at Disney World reaction. Now we're going to do the reaction to Universal Orlando. So there's about 30 rides. So this guy has an opportunity to rank 30 to 1. Should be controversial. It shouldn't be controversial. Let's see what he's got. And let's see what we would rank it. Let's see if we agree. Let's go. 3, 2, 1, go.
Nearly a year ago today, I compiled a list ranking every roller coaster at Universal Orlando from worst to best. Ever since that video was posted, I've wanted to go back and rank the other rides at the resort as well. Not only do they have roller coasters, but some incredible dark rides, simulators, and even water rides. So instead of just ranking the roller coasters,
First things first. When did he post this? A year ago. Okay. Should be pretty relevant.
I wanted to throw all the other rides into the mix. There are 32 rides combined between Universal Studios and Islands of Adventure, so this is a much more ambitious project than last time. Not only that, but I'm ranking these rides a bit differently than I did with the coasters alone, which I'll get into later in the video. In the meantime, please be sure to support this channel with a like or subscription if you like content like this, and with that, it's time to rank every ride at the Universal Orlando Resort from worst to best.
Let's do it.
Number 32, Fast and Furious Supercharged.
Okay, not bad. Alright, let's see what he says though about it.
This may be the most predictable placement of the entire list, but I genuinely think this ride is that bad. The queue is kind of cool to give it some props, but I wouldn't call it one of the best. What is truly great are the pre-shows. Well, more so the cast members in the pre-shows. They play off the characters on screen so well, sometimes seeming entirely disinterested, which is hilarious. I'm pretty sure that many of them are in on the joke, knowing exactly the reputation this ride has, which leads to the ride itself. If you didn't know, this was originally a simulated portion in the studio tour at Hollywood's Universal Studios. Like Skull Island Reign of Kong, Universal decided to clone that section of the ride, and make some extra stuff around it so it seemed a bit more complete. We'll get to Skull Island later in this video, but let's just say it accomplished its goal much better than Fast and Furious did. To be completely fair, there were some extra scenes added to this one. Unfortunately, they are incredibly boring and poorly executed. In fact, the entire story of this ride is so hard to track and just feels so thrown together. And when you finally get to the ride itself, disappointment is an understatement. As someone a bit sensitive to noise, this ride went from bad to straight up painful. That's not even mentioning the visuals, which have been fairly clowned on for years at this point. More than anything, I'm just shocked Universal thought this addition was a good call, especially in a park already swamped with screen-based attractions. Removing not one, but 2 better attractions wasn't a good call either. That makes this ride more than just bad. It's kind of insulting. Hopefully in a few years, Universal can right their wrong by tearing this thing down and starting over. Just a suggestion, but a Fast and Furious roller coaster sounds like a much better alternative. Number 30.
Okay, so that's never gonna happen. I don't think it's the worst thing ever when we look at Disney and we see like the Cars show. It's better than that one. However, yeah, I mean, the cool stuff about it is the garage, the pre-shows and everything. The ride itself, you have to really combine all the elements to make it into that one thing. The ride itself, if you watch Fast and Furious movies, you understand the craziness, the laughability of how, unrealistic some of the stuff is. So it kind of plays into that ride. The story makes no sense, but the ride and you got to do it at least once, and the actual visuals that you see, like the tangible visuals, like the cars, the parts, the garage, that's all cool. But let's see if there's any ride that's worse than that on his list.
1. Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon.
Very interesting how he's going. So this is not a horrible ride the first couple times you ride it, but let's see what he writes.
This ride is in a very similar spot to Fast and Furious for me. Honestly, it might be even more baffling. Like with Fast and Furious, this took the spot of a superior ride, replacing it with yet another simulator in a park filled with it.
What ride was this before?
Not only that, but I don't think anyone was...
What did Jimmy Fallon's Race Through New York replace? Twister. Okay, yeah, Twister was better.
Really clamoring for a ride based on Jimmy Fallon of all people. Like with Fast and Furious, the plus side is that the queue is kind of cool, but considering I've never seen this ride with a line, I've rarely stayed in there long enough to take notice. Unlike Fast and Furious though, the story of the ride is pretty easy to understand, and the ride is much less painful and more just boring. The motion isn't anything crazy, so in the end it's just a basic flying theater. As I said earlier, this ride never has a line, which isn't something I can say about Fast and Furious, so it might be an even bigger mistake on Universal's part. An unexciting ride with an unexciting IP, unsurprisingly, didn't turn out to be a huge hit.
So I think he made good points there. I think the reason obviously they use that is like their that is like their shining beacon, NBC being the owner of Universal, so they have a part of the park obviously by rights and likeness. So for them to put something like late night, which was at the time when they introduced late night, I believe this was like 2017, 2018, and that was just a huge part of YouTube and everything in between. So it made sense. Everything made sense for that to happen, especially with Jimmy Fallon's popularity. So for them to make a studio and that was really cool to bring people into that mix, and then to bring people into a ride because you want to make it some sort of experience and not just like a museum. It kind of works. So interesting though. We'll talk about that later. I don't know the other 30 that he picked yet, so let's see where he lands.
30, The Cat in the Hat. This ride is in a pretty rough state right now, to say the least. Let's start with the ride vehicles, which allegedly used to spin you much more than they do right now. There's specific points in this ride where it really seems like you should be spinning more, or like, at all, but instead it just doesn't. Maybe it's because it needed to be adjusted to appeal to children, or maybe it's because the company who made these vehicles has been out of business for a while now, but still. They could try keeping it up until they run out of parts, but if I had a choice, I'd tear this ride down and put in a trackless dark ride instead. Still based on Cat in the Hat, but with more modern theming and less of that. This ride has some charm as it stands today, but as time goes on, it becomes more and more off-putting to say the least. I'm not insulted by this ride's existence like the previous two on this list, but it definitely needs some help in the near future. Number 29.
See, I'm actually agreeing with all his picks so far. That's not bad. And I like the assessment. The Cat in the Hat. I haven't wrote it, but like, I can't remember the last time I wrote it. I think I wrote it like 3 years ago, something like that. Here's the thing though. With the Cat in the Hat, there's opportunity for them to do something. I don't know if they have the room to do something like a Ratatouille or something in that regard, but the Seuss land really needs to revitalize, especially since you have other, like the Lorax, Horton Hears a Hue, other things coming around the corner. You really need to play into that. I think that they have an opportunity to do so. It feels very much like the Toyland almost, like in Hollywood Studios, but they have to do it correctly. So we'll see how they do it in the future. I don't disagree with that pick. Next.
Carousel. Now,
I would. Okay.
We're getting out of the bad ride territory and more onto the ones that are just fine. I mean, this is a carousel. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just a pretty basic attraction. For families, I think this earns its spot in the park, but it doesn't really do it for me. And honestly, it's not supposed to. It's just one of those rides that is definitely here. Number 28.
I mean, you can't really disagree with that.
King and Kodos' Twirl and Hurl. Back at Universal Studios, King and Kodos is one of two Dumbo-esque attractions at the resort. The interactivity is kind of fun, from the fact that you can move the ride vehicles up and down, to the voiceover instructing you to attack various Simpsons, but that doesn't make it any less of a basic ride. It has earned a spot in the park as a nice filler attraction, but it doesn't deserve to be much higher on the list because of that. Number 27.
See, I really didn't. I don't even think I've rode that ride, but I would put it at the very end, just like he did.
One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. This is very similar to King and Kodos, if not the exact same ride.
This one's better.
But instead of trying to attack the Simpsons, you're trying to avoid fountains of water spraying at you. Honestly, it seems more difficult to try and hit those fountains than it is to avoid them, but it's still a fun gimmick. The theming is also pretty fun, fitting right in with the world of Seuss Landing. Pretty good, especially for kids. Number 26.
I don't know. We'll see. I think that one could go up 1 or 2 spots. We'll see.
Hogwarts Express
How is this? No, this ain't a ride.
Hogsmeade Station. Okay, I know this barely counts as a ride, but I wanted to cover all my bases just in case.
Okay.
This is more of a means of transportation than anything else,
but
it's a very well themed version of that. There are screens instead of windows that show some fun little scenes, but the screens facing the hallway are much cooler, and probably the highlight of the ride itself. Unfortunately, the Hogsmeade Station queue is much less interesting than the one in the opposite park, which is why it places just slightly lower on this list. Number 25. Hogwarts Express King's Cross Station. This is pretty much the exact same ride, although the visuals are a bit different the other way around. What puts this above Hogsmeade Station for me is the queue, which features the famous platform 9 3/4. While the effect isn't quite as good as actually walking through the wall, it's close enough to be somewhat interesting. The downside is that this almost always has one of the longest lines in the park, which makes walking from resort to resort much more compelling for me. Still, a nice alternative for those who are looking for that. Number 24,
Okay.
Despicable Me and Minion Mayhem. Here's yet another simulator ride at Universal Studios.
Yep.
And although I'm not a huge fan of it, I at least
And this took place of it's Jimmy Neutron.
understand it. Despicable Me, like it or not, is an incredibly popular franchise. And retheming the simulator that was already installed here makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
The story itself is also much more fun than Jimmy Fallon is, with a cartoony aesthetic which fits a simulator like this much better.
Yep.
Do I wish that this was still Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast? Yeah, obviously.
Of course he does.
Still, this is in no way a bad ride. It's just a really mediocre
Yeah,
one.
I'd put it
Number
about
23,
there.
The High in the Sky Sue's Trolley Train Ride.
Bro, really?
Fun fact, this was actually
Bro really loves his people movers. He loves people. Dude, how is this not like at the back of the list?
the first ride I ever did at a Universal
That's why.
Park. While maybe not the best introduction, it's still a pretty decent ride overall. There's some nice views of the surrounding area and some nice theming in the indoor sections. Not only that, but there's 2 separate tracks that go to entirely different places, which is a neat little thing to help re-rideability. Overall, a nice little tour of the land that's perfect for families. Number 22,
Okay.
Pteranodon Flyers. I'll admit,
This is pretty fun. Like, if you're in that age bracket. That's probably the only thing I can say about that one.
purely assuming on this ride's placement, as I've actually never been on it. There's a rule in place that you either must be a kid or someone with a kid to ride, and I'm meeting neither of those parameters. So the closest I've ever gotten to riding this is just watching from the ground. It looks sort of fun and seems to offer some good views of Jurassic Park,
That's a weird rule,
but I'll
too.
admit I'm not too bummed that I haven't been on it. It's nothing too special. Number 21.
It's really not that much special. I mean, it's kind of fun because you're kind of like feeling like you're swinging and stuff. So like the first time, you got to do it one time, at least one time. But past that, it's really not that crazy fun to watch.
Poseidon's Fury. Okay,
Poseidon Fury. Okay, so first off, this doesn't exist anymore, and we'll see what he says. This is basically an interactive show for what I know.
I know this isn't really a ride, but again, I'm just trying to cover all my bases. The consensus on this ride seems to be incredibly mixed, between those who absolutely hate it and for those who like or even love it. I guess I fall right in the middle, because there is some great stuff about this attraction. The theming is amazing, as is the case for the entire
It's crazy. This place is called the Lost Continent, right? And Islands of Adventure. However, as of today, there's 0 rides because Poseidon's Fury is going away. It's so funny.
Lost Continent, and some of the effects are still cool to this day. There are just as many that don't quite work, but in the end it balances out for me. To be honest, I don't remember too much from my experience here outside of that, as I haven't gone through this thing in years, but by looking at footage, I think this is about where I'd place it. Number 20, Flight of the Hippogriff. Here's where my list starts to differ from my coaster rankings. Originally, I put this ride over Woody Woodpecker, purely for its better theming and slightly better stats. But after rewriting both somewhat recently, I think Flight of the Hippogriff is just a bit worse. The theming is still good and the ride itself is perfect for kids, but nothing really stands out to put it ahead of the other offering.
Okay,
Number 19, Woody Woodpecker's
we'll see what's
Nuthouse
different
Coaster.
here.
Woody Woodpecker, on the other hand, has one element that puts it over the edge for me, and that would be the final turn. It's nothing incredible, but it offers some pretty solid lateral force, almost like a wild mouse.
That doesn't not change it for me, but okay.
Other than that, it's basically on par with Flight of the Hippogriff, but that turn really comes out of nowhere and adds to the experience. Number 18, Stormforce Acceleratron.
Stormforce Acceleratron. Oh, this is in Hero Island. Yep.
This is one ride I think I've only done once
Mad
before.
Teacups.
And that's because it's just a souped up version of the Teacups ride at Magic Kingdom. It's nothing outstanding, but since it offers more thrill than the Dumbo clones, it's a ride I can appreciate a
That's
bit
okay.
more. Not one of the standouts in Marvel Superhero Island, but a good little filler ride.
Not bad.
Number 17, Doctor Doom's Fearfall.
17? Bro, Doctor Doom didn't make the top 10? Okay. Well, so, okay. I'll see. I might respect this. We'll see.
Speaking of Marvel Superhero Island, this is another ride that I'm a bit mixed on. I've never been a huge fan of drop towers, so
That's
this
why.
one lasting about 20 seconds is both a good and a bad thing for me. Good because, again, not a huge fan, but bad because of how little a ride experience it offers for whatever you spent in line. Luckily, the line itself is pretty cool, but it doesn't save this ride from being number 17 on this list. Number 16, The Simpsons.
Before we get into The Simpsons, one thing I always went to Doctor Doom's Fearfall drop first. out of everything because it kind of starts your day. It gets you ready for the rest of the day because you're gonna ride a bunch of roller coasters and stuff, so you're not loose yet. So you go, woo! It's kind of like Tower of Terror, but it's more outside. You don't really get all the air that you would get on Doctor Doom, like you and Doctor Doom. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun. The Simpsons ride, horrible ride. I'd put this like in the 20s, but let's see what he says.
This ride seems to be a bit controversial, particularly because of what it replaced. Back to the Future, the ride, was one of the most beloved attractions at Universal Studios, and one that unfortunately I was never able to experience.
Same.
It definitely looked fun, and while I'd probably prefer it over this ride, I wouldn't say I hate it. It's yet another simulator in a park full of them, but it's one of the most charming purely because of the theme. I swear I remember nearly every line from that pre-show, and the ride itself has plenty of memorable and fun moments throughout. I'll admit the animation isn't amazing, as is the motion of the vehicles, but I still enjoy it. Maybe it's just because of how many times I've been on it, but I don't mind this ride's existence at all. Number 15.
Nah, put that shit like at number 25. E.T.
E.T. Adventure.
Okay.
This is a weird one. E.T. Adventure is the single remaining opening day attraction still operating at Universal Studios, purely because of the stubbornness of Steven Spielberg. He apparently has been doing everything in his power to keep it where it is for as long as he lived.
Good!
And honestly, I can respect that. This ride isn't amazing by any means, but being the only classic dark ride still standing at the resort, it definitely has its charm. The first half is much better than the second, but the second is so strange that I can't help but love it too. Hopefully this ride will stay in the park for at least a few more years.
Bro, I hope it stays forever. Who hears my ET stands? I mean, come on, this has got to stay in here forever. It's literally magnifico. It's awesome. Like to experience the 80s and 90s and through the smells and like the environment, perfect. This is a dark ride. This is always should stay. I hope it never goes away.
Number 14, Men in Black Alien Attack.
For a long shit in the back.
Time, I thought this ride should be torn down and replaced. While I still think this area, plus the land where the Fear Factor live stage used to be, would make for a great Middle-earth, I see the appeal of this ride. I've never been a huge fan of shooting.
Lord of the Rings? That'd be crazy cool. That's not gonna happen.
Dark rides because, to be honest, I suck at them. Even so, the theming, story, and humor presented throughout are great. The spinning of the vehicles is really intense, which is funny considering it's actually the same ride system as Cat in the Hat. With the spare parts running dry, I do wonder what the future of this ride might look like, but for now, it's one of the better rides at Universal Studios.
No, it's not.
Number 13, Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket.
How you put this at 13? He's got to have some sort of bias. This is a top 5 ride in Universal. This is a top 5 ride at Universal. For him not to put this in the top 5, there's got to be some sort of extreme bias.
I kind of tore into this ride in my last video, but while I'm still incredibly confused by it, I appreciated it a bit more on my most recent ride. But let me recap my complaints. First off, the theming is just bad.
I don't agree with that statement. I'll wait for him to finish though.
Apparently it's supposed to be that you're recording a music video on a roller coaster, which explains both the camera and music choices, but I've never even looked at the on-ride video. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you didn't even know that was meant to be the gimmick. The music choice...
I don't think that's the whole point of the gimmick. I don't think that's the whole point of the ride. The ride is... The main part of the ride is like, sure, the music video, but that's not the thesis statement. The thesis statement is you get to listen to music and go on a Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket. That's the thesis.
Choices are a unique aspect on their own, but the greater purpose it serves really doesn't amount to anything. Second, the layout. Like I said, I gained more appreciation for this layout on my most recent ride, but that doesn't mean the countless brake runs are any more enjoyable. It's meant to help the ride's capacity, but it does lose a lot of the ride's pacing in the process. Finally, the restraints are just weird. They're incredibly bulky due to the music selection, but I'll admit they don't really get in the way of airtime. It's just more a weird quirk. Even with those complaints, I do understand why some like this ride. The layout, minus the brake runs, are actually pretty good. It has some intense positive Gs, and at times even some airtime. The non-inverting loop and treble clef would have to be my two favorite elements. Vertical lifts make me more uncomfortable than anything else, but it's still a unique start to a very strange ride. I do wish this ride was a B&M Hyper instead, but as it stands, it's perfectly mediocre. Number 12.
Who said mediocre? Who said mediocre? No. It's a great ride. It's the elements of the vertical, the elements of going through a building, the swirls, everything like that. It's beautiful. The loop, the large inverted loop, amazing. The music choice, depending on the songs you listen to, it usually is timed perfectly with the ride. The brake runs kind of gives you like a breather, then you jump right back into it. So it accomplishes the functionality and it gives you the ability to pace. I think it's a top 5 ride at Universal Studios. Let's see what, or Universal Resort.
12. Transformers The Ride 3D.
It's better than Transformers The Ride 3D, even though that's a good ride.
Okay, I have a bit of a rant for this one. Indulge me for a second. This ride is just a worse version of Spider-Man in nearly every way. It's the same ride system, nearly the same layout, and many of the same story beats, but it fundamentally misunderstands what made Spider-Man so good in comparison. The main issue is with the story and how it's communicated. Basically, the Decepticons are after the Allspark, and you have to go off with evac to defend it. It's a pretty simple story, but every scene just boils down to, here's this bad guy, yell his name, fight for a bit, and then move on. I know that might sound like what Spider-Man does, but there's some key differences. Spider-Man's story is equally as simple, but the way it's communicated gives you time to be introduced to each of the characters. Rather than a villain coming on screen and having evac shout their name, the Spider-Man ride introduces these characters and fleshes them out through small interactions between you, the rider, and them. Instead of having the action take place between two characters in front of you, Spider-Man gets you much more involved in the story. I don't know if all that made sense, but I'd rather not get too off track here, especially when this is a good ride. It might not have the same magic as Spider-Man, but the mix of practical effects and screens really works, and it's pretty thrilling too. If Spider-Man didn't exist, I might have less problems with this one, and maybe it's my bias towards the IP, but Transformers doesn't really work for me on the same level. In the end, it just feels kind of empty, which I guess makes it a perfect adaptation of the films. Number 11.
Damn, he just started hating at the end. No, I don't think it's a bad ride. I think it's a really good ride. Yeah, if you minus that story element, I do like how Spider-Man does that. I mean, if you're a Transformers fan, especially the first 3 movies, which are very different than the last 3, it kind of plays that, it tells that tale very well, especially like the first and second movie. It really plays into those 2 characters, or not characters, but movies, especially with the characters like B, Megatron, the main guy, Optimus. Gosh, my brain went crazy there. So like it really plays into that, and you can see it in real time, and you have the noise, the music, everything. It feels like you're actually in the mix of a battle. So that's why I really appreciate you don't get the same intensity that you get on Transformers as you would get on Spider-Man. So like Spider-Man's not as intense as Transformers by any means. So like if you like that type of ride, it's a great ride. So I might even put it in the top 10, but let's see what we got. 11. He still hasn't said Kong Skull Island, which is interesting. What else is we haven't said? Let's think about what we haven't said so far. You haven't said Mummy. That's a good thing. You haven't said Hulk or Velocicoaster. You haven't said Hogwarts. You haven't said Hagrid's. You haven't said Jurassic Park. You haven't said the Rapids. You haven't said the Log Flume. You haven't seen you haven't done the Bond. What was it? Not the Bond. What's it? You haven't done the Jason Bourne, so that's 9. The other 2 probably going to be Spider-Man, and the last one. What would the last one be? Trying to remember. It doesn't matter. Let's just watch.
11. Skull Island Reign of Kong. I know this was a while ago now, but remember when I said this ride was better than Fast and Furious Supercharged in every way?
Barely.
Well, let's get into it. Originally, I thought this ride was just alright, but my appreciation for it goes up every time I go on it. First off, the queue is one of the best at the park.
It is the only thing that's good
and
about
everything, which is such an unnecessary touch. Even the outside facade is just epic, with this huge door leading to a much smaller door. Okay, still, once you get on the ride itself, rather than Fast and Furious's lazily added scenes, Skull Island actually feels fleshed out, with more animatronics at the beginning and the end. In fact, that Kong animatronic might be the best they've ever made. I will admit though, the actual climax of this ride is pretty disappointing. Like with Fast and Furious, this was originally a simulator in the Universal Studios tour, and they ended up saving that part for last. The visuals are much better than Fast and Furious, but that doesn't make the simulation any better. All things considered, this is a pretty great ride, especially when it's in a park that's not already filled with simulators. Seriously, Islands of Adventure is so much better than Studios. Can't stress that enough.
I don't hate his analysis, I just don't agree with the time.
10. Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts.
That's it.
Starting off the top 10, we have an attraction that's just a little confusing to me. It's technically a roller coaster, but the roller coaster portions aren't all that thrilling, minus the amazing tilt.
It's not a roller coaster.
It acts more like a dark ride.
But it is a dark ride. You missed the point. It's not a roller coaster.
Than anything. But the simulated portions aren't all that great either, again, minus the first tilt track. Honestly, it's cooler to see how this ride works than to actually ride the ride. Even with those complaints, Escape from Gringotts is still very well done. There's a great mix of physical theming and screens, although a bit heavy on the latter. And the queue is one of the best at the resort. What's even better than all that for me is Diagon Alley itself, which might just be the best theme park land ever constructed. It is packed with detail in
He's never been to Galaxy's Edge. Last night.
Every corner, which makes it an absolute joy to explore whenever I'm at the park.
Actually,
otherwise,
it might be tied with Galaxy's Edge, you know?
May not be the strongest Harry Potter attraction, but it's one that Universal Studios desperately needed. Number 9, Jurassic Park.
Hold on, before we get to that. Yeah, it's definitely not a roller coaster by any means, so I think he missed the mark there. It's more about the experience of the ride for Harry Potter fans. It's about going through the loop of going through the Gringotts Bank to the vaults and trying to figure out, oh shit, there's Bellatrix. Oh gosh, there's Voldemort. And there's like an epic battle. There's the dragon. There's everything in between. So you're definitely in, this is about the Deathly Hallows. This is about, going to the vaults, finding, actually, this is, hold on. This is Deathly Hallows. I was thinking with this because they're trying to find the Horcrux. So, yeah, great. It's good. It's good. I might even put it I'd put it over the River Adventure. River Adventure's way too old, but let's see what he says about it.
River Adventure. The first of 3 water rides at the resort, Jurassic Park is another ride I never realized was as strong as it is. I'm usually more of a thrill person, so while the final drop is great, the rest of the ride didn't really do it for me. On my most recent ride though, I had a lot more appreciation for the first half, and how it worked to build up where everything goes wrong. The serene tone of that first half deeply contrasts the genuinely scary second half, which makes this ride really stand out. Still though, as someone who prefers thrills, this would have to be my least favorite water ride in the park. Number 8.
Don't hate it. I mean, this is a decent ride. It's been around forever, since Jurassic Park came out in 93. This came out a little bit after that. The boat ride itself, I don't think it's a water ride. I really think it's more like a ride on the water versus it's being a water ride, if you know what I mean by that. The animatronics are kind of old. The story, you could spot some, disparities within the story, whatnot, and everything. But it's an interesting ride, especially in the early 2000s. This is a top 10 ride. Today, it's not a top 10 ride. I don't know why I put it in the top 10.
Great. Popeye and Bluto's Bilge-Rat barges. On to the second.
Before we jump into any of these more water rides, I'm not myself. Like depending on the day, if it's super hot, yeah, well, let's get on some water rides. But depending on the day, if we're in the spring or in the fall, and it's like a crisp 65, 75 degrees, somewhere like that, I'm not getting on these water rides because it's just going to make it. We're just going to be, we're going to get some rashes. It's just going to be wet and it's just not going to feel good the rest of the day. Even though those rides would feel good at the time, once you get off the rides, that's what I think about. So let's jump into
second water ride. And this might just be the best raft ride in the world. Not only is it incredibly
in the world, okay,
themed, perfectly capturing a cartoonish energy, but the opportunities to get wet are ridiculously well integrated.
Oh my God, yeah.
Speaking of, this might just be the wettest ride in the world. Like, monumentally more than any other water ride I've ever been on. In the moment, it's great, especially on a hot day, but after the ride, it's significantly less so.
What'd I just say?
You're standing around dripping for hours. Even so, that's a huge part of the fun with this ride, watching your friends get wet and trying to avoid it yourself. If you're willing to accept those consequences, you'll find one of the best rides in the resort. Number 7, Dudley.
I don't hate that. I really don't hate that analysis. It's just like, what type of day is it? Is it a day to get wet or not?
Dudley Do-Rights
Same with
rips
this.
off Oz.
Same with this.
This might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but Dudley Do-Rights is easily my favorite water ride in Islands of Adventure. You might not get as wet as you do on Popeyes, but for me that's a plus. It's right in between Popeyes and Jurassic Park in terms of how soaked you get, which is a perfect in-between for me. The theming isn't incredible by any means, but I think it works for what the ride is going for. In a lot of ways, this is Universal's Splash Mountain. A log flume
Yeah.
featuring multiple drops and based on a property that not many are familiar with. I do think Disney's offering is slightly superior, but that doesn't make Dudley Do-Rights any less charming. It's still a great water ride, with a perfect mix of thrill, theming, and fun. Number 6.
So yeah, and I don't know what the I can't remember what is the land Universal, like what is it called? Toon Lagoon, is that what it's called? I thought that's what it's called. It's Toon Lagoon. So Toon Lagoon, you have the likes of like Betty Boop, you have Popeyes, Rip Rapids, you have like Dudley Do-Rights. I mean, you have a lot of IP a lot of people aren't familiar with just because the that version of cartoons isn't pushed as much as other cartoons today. But yeah, it's fun. But at the same thesis statement, depending on the day of the, depending on how the day is going, is it going to be a day that's hot and you need to get wet, or is it a day you don't want to get on wet rides? If it's the latter, I would avoid these two. Number 6 though. So let's recap real quick. We still got Hogwarts, Velocicoaster, Hulk, Born. We still have Born Legacy, so that's got to be 6 at this point. And then you got Hagrid's, and you got Spider-Man. So we got probably Born Legacy here.
It's the Incredible Hulk coaster.
Interesting.
Moving on from the water rides, here's a coaster that I've had my fair share of takes on. My main gripe is how this ride really dies down after that mid-course brake run, losing all sense of speed from then on. Honestly though, I think I was a bit harsh on it. This section of the ride might be a bit boring, but there's significantly less of the ride than I remembered. I've said before how this is the second half, but it's really more like the fourth quarter. Those other 3 quarters, on the other hand, are incredibly intense, and with some unique elements for a roller coaster of this type. The drive tire launch is fantastic, leading right into a snappy 0G roll. All of the inversions afterwards keep up that intensity, at times leading to grey out moments. Not only that, but the theming in the queue and the landscaping in the second half only further solidify this ride's placement on this list. The Incredible Hulk might not be my favorite B&M in Florida, but it's definitely up there. Number 5.
So, first off, fun fact that in Disneyland Paris, back in the early 90s, I believe it was early 90s, they created Space Mountain for a third or fourth time. And it was a Paris-themed / French themed Space Mountain, right? So it was based off of a story versus actual Space Mountain. And in that ride development and engineering, it was the first time they ever had a propulsion generated launch ever in history. So Hulk obviously did a copy of that. It's not a bad ride at all. If this was an indoor coaster, it would be on its like number 2 on his list. It just doesn't feel as fast because you're outside and you have more scale, I believe. So, but it's a fun ride, especially over the water, and it has a great look to the park. Especially when you're looking to go to the park, you see Hulk over it, and you're like, oh yeah, that's awesome.
5. Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. Here's where we get to the S-tier rides in the resort.
Okay.
Not only are these the best of the best in Universal's lineup, but some of the best rides in the world. That starts with Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, one of the most influential dark rides ever made. Not only is it an amazing ride as is, but the fact that this is a ride based on Harry Potter was enough to completely turn the tides in Orlando. Universal gaining the theme park rights to the Harry Potter franchise was more valuable than anyone could have predicted, increasing their attendance by massive amounts, and giving them an even larger share of the theme park market. This might have happened whether or not the land was actually good, but the fact that Universal went as far as they did really proves what they can do when they put their all into it. Forbidden Journey is not only incredibly themed from the queue to the ride itself, but it's also one of the most groundbreaking dark rides with the vehicle it uses. The seats are mounted on a robotic arm, which allows for some insane motion in every direction. At times, it feels like you're actually hanging upside down. The physical sets are fantastic, but the simulated sections would probably have to be the weakest part. The motion and visuals are fine, but it doesn't compare to everything else the ride has to offer. A Apart from those minor gripes, I'm so glad we got this attraction, and the magical land that surrounds it.
So I think the first time I ever rode Hogwarts was in 2015, and it was probably one of the greatest experiences I've ever had because it was so interesting. Just had finished refinishing the Harry Potter series, watching the movies, and going to the land itself, seeing everything. But then actually the castle part, you got to put the castle to be part of the ride. So the castle queue and everything, you see everything, and you're like, oh yeah, remember that. And then when you're on the ride, you're actually able to experience like I almost said G-force, but not the G-force, but the actual swaying and the movements, and you feel like you're on a broom and it's magical, and you have the scenes and you got different things, whether it be Quidditch or Dragon, etc. So it's just such a great fun ride to be a part of. It dies down each time you want to ride it. That's with everything, but it's an experience more or less than anything. So you have to definitely go do that. That's the number one thing. And of course, what he said about how influential it was to get this get this IP into the park. It was super influential because at the time, of course, Disney was sweeping them and everything. Disney has regained their malice with Avatar, with Galaxy's Edge, etc. And as they expand their empires, but this is so cool because you're actually able to experience a real life fantasy of being Harry Potter, being a part of the ride. Of course, all of these rides are part of IPs, but this one specifically is something different, something special. Number 4, we still haven't seen the Bourne Legacy ride. Where is he going to put that on there? Is he just going to skip it? Because we got Mummy, Hagrid's Velocicoaster, Bourne.
Number 4, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man.
He's going to skip it because we only have... okay, that's fine. So if I was to guess right now, we have Spider-Man, Velocicoaster, Hagrid's, and Spider-Man. We have Spider-Man, Velocicoaster, Hagrid's Mummy. I'm gonna guess that he's gonna go Hagrid's, Mummy, Velocicoaster. Let's see what he does.
As great as Forbidden Journey is, I can't bring myself to put it over my favorite dark ride in the parks. The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man is just as groundbreaking as Forbidden Journey, even if the ripple it made wasn't quite as intense. I've already discussed much of what this ride does right when I talked about Transformers, but I'll recap a bit here. Every character is just so charming, and the interactions you have with them really make each stand out. I know this ride heavily relies on screens, but the mix of physical stats and cartoony aesthetic make it work for me much more than, let's say, Race Through New York. Speaking of those sets, there are so many fantastic practical effects from beginning to end. Simple things like this floating box, all the way to the amazing fire effect, work so well to suck you into this world. Anyway, Spider-Man to this day is the best ride at Islands of Adventure, if not the best in the entire world.
It's the best in... Wait, what did you say?
Actions you have with them really make each stand out. I know this ride heavily relies on screens, but the mix of physical stats and cartoony aesthetic make it work for me much more than, let's say, Race Through New York. Speaking of those sets, there are so many fantastic practical effects from beginning to end. Simple things like this floating box, all the way to the amazing fire effect, work so well to suck you into this world. Anyway, Spider-Man to this day is the best ride at Islands of Adventure.
Okay, he fixed it. He said dark ride because there's 2 more that you haven't said in this park.
If not the best in the entire world. Hopefully no one else tries to make a Spider-Man ride, which just turns out to be a worse version of Toy Story Mania. That would be pretty stupid.
He's talking about... Wait, is this real?
Number 3, Revenge of the Mummy.
Okay, so he's got Hagrid's and Velocicoaster.
Due to its extended refurbishment, I haven't had the chance to go on Revenge of the Mummy for a very long time.
Aww.
But my last few rides on it prove that it's a true classic. I would go as far as to say this is the only great ride at Universal Studios, but maybe that's a bit harsh. While the past 2 rides have had more of the focus on theming than thrill, I think this ride definitely leans more on the thrill side. Being a roller coaster, Mummy is able to have some intense moments, from the launches to the occasional moments of airtime. Even though thrill is the focus of this ride, it takes some time getting you into it. The scenes before the launch are very well themed, with one of the most memorable scripts on any ride I've ever been on. Another great moment is the fake out station, which actually got me on my first ride. Now I enjoy it more so for the airtime filled drop right after. I'm not sure what the future holds for this attraction, especially with it yet to reopen, but I don't see any of the changes impacting its placement on this list. This is the best ride in a park that could use a lot more love in the coming years. Number 2.
So I only disagree at one point. I think it's a better ride than Hagrid. I think Velocicoaster's better, but I think Hagrid's just not as fun as Mummy, especially I've rode it after the refurbishment. Last time I rode it was in 2022. But anyway, so when it comes down to the actual the ride itself, the first time I ever rode it was in 2005, so I was like 8 years old. And just the thrill of the Mummy was my favorite ride for like the longest time. I think it's my second favorite not Universal Hollywood, but Universal Studios Resort, just behind Velocicoaster. And the reason is the theming, the excitement, the thrill. There's a part of the ride where you think it's over. They try to make it look like it's over, but then the curse is real and everything just goes crazy. The cinematic effects, the fire, the feel of the fire, the warmth, the craziness of going, the sounds, it's just amazing. The second best ride. But I'm gonna be sad if he puts Velocicoaster at 2. Because he's gonna be wrong. Let's see what he puts.
Jurassic World Velocicoaster.
He's wrong. He's wrong. That's all I gotta say. He's wrong.
Velocicoaster. Okay, hear me out. As a coaster enthusiast, I absolutely adore Velocicoaster. It's my second favorite roller coaster I've ever been on, right behind Fury 325. But as I said earlier...
Wait. Hagrid's is a roller coaster. So... Okay.
This list is ranked differently than my coaster rankings would be. Velocicoaster as a roller coaster is easily the best in the park.
Yep.
As a ride though, I think it's slightly outclassed by another I'll talk about in a second. As an example, despite being my favorite coaster in the world, if Fury 325 were on this list, it probably wouldn't even place above Incredible Hulk. It's all about the mixture between thrill, theming, and unique elements. Still, Velocicoaster excels at all three of those. Firstly, this ride packs some intense thrill. Hitting a max speed of 70 miles per hour and launching up that 155-foot top hat, this ride is easily the most extreme in the park. The layout is fantastic, getting more and more crazy as it continues. The first half is great, but pales in comparison to everything.
That's pretty cool. You see right here, you got you have the Dr. Seuss animated guy in the water. Pretty funny.
After that second launch. From the top hat to the godly Mosasaurus roll. Even with that focus on thrill, Velocicoaster doesn't skimp on the theming. The queue is one of the best in the resort.
Oh my god,
with some breathtaking animatronics and a fantastic view of the second launch. The rock work in the first half is next level, adding a whole bunch of head choppers to increase the thrill. There's not much in terms of theming on the second half of the ride, but there doesn't need to be either. Finally though, for as unique as this ride is, it doesn't match the one-of-a-kind attraction next on the list. Velocicoaster has some of the best theming of any roller coaster, along with one of the best layouts. But what number 1 accomplishes, it's just a bit beyond that for me. Enough teasing. Let's get...
Okay, because he's going to talk about Hagrid's in a second, but I want to say my piece real quick, and then I'll say my piece after he says about Hagrid's, and we'll wrap it up. But anyway, so Velocicoaster. When I rode in 2021, that's the last time I rode it, actually, because of virtual queue and etc. But when I rode in 2021, it was breathtaking, the best ride I've ever rode in my life. I mean, the ability to really experience, because I'm a Jurassic Park fan, I'm a Jurassic World fan, so the ability to experience it in a non-Jurassic boat ride way was super thrilling, especially be able to go through the different turns, loops, and going upside down, and the speed of this roller coaster and the proximity to the surroundings, whether it be the rock, the track, the ground, the water, it just brings another level of thrill because you don't know if you're going to hit the water or you're going to hit your head. You don't know. So that thrill encapsulates, and then be able to have the 3D screens, not 3D, but the 2D screens that actually portray like raptors running, and this is the Velocicoaster, Velociraptor, etc. It's just one of a kind, and you just have to ride this roller coaster. So let me tell you, there's no way you can put Hagrid's above this without super going crazy into the thought process of like, it's Hagrid, it's cool theming, etc. But let's see what he has to say.
To number 1, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure. The ride with the longest name in the resort just so happens to be the best in the resort. While it isn't nearly as thrilling as Velocicoaster, everything comes together so perfectly that it has easily become the crowd pleaser attraction at Island of Adventure. Riding a motorbike and clinging onto those handlebars is such a unique experience already, but that isn't where the unique elements end. There are plenty of animatronics throughout, each representing their own mythical creature, which is something I can't say many other coasters offer. Besides that, the landscaping perfectly supports the idea that you're exploring a lush forest, especially at night. with the only light coming from the headlight of your motorbike. Even with all that theming, Hagrid's doesn't let up on the thrill. There are a load of great launches, but that's only the beginning. Before I get further into it, I would highly recommend going into this ride blind, so skip this part if you have yet to experience it. All good? Alright, let's get into it. First off is that spike, which is an incredible experience in the front, and such a well-hidden element. It comes out of nowhere, especially with the switch track keeping you backwards for a lot longer than you'd expect. Then you head indoors for the second unique element of this ride. The drop track is so perfect, especially for those who have no knowledge of it going in. It allows for a pretty solid moment of airtime too, so I'd appreciate it even after the initial shock. All of those elements compel me to call this the best ride in the resort, even if Velocicoaster is my favorite. In fact, I asked my friends which one they preferred during a recent visit, and each of them said it was easily Hagrid's. And to be honest, I get it. Velocicoaster at the end of the day is just a roller coaster. Hagrid's goes beyond that, fully immersing the rider in its world, and supporting that with elements that you would rarely find on any other roller coaster. Not only that, but with its lower thrill level, it allows for even more people to be able to enjoy it. All of that is to say that I think Hagrid's might just be the perfect ride. A fantastic mix of theming, thrill, and pure fun all come together to make Hagrid's not only the best ride at Universal, but one of the best rides ever created. And that's it.
He did a good job selling it. But I'd still prefer Velocicoaster. I mean, I would put Hagrid's probably at my 3 and Mummy at my 2. I still think, I mean, you could say the same thing with Mummy with the different aspects of how they do a stop, the theming and all that, because all of these have IPs. You don't want to skip over anything. Every single one of these rides have an IP attached to it, so the theming will be good. So once you get past the theming element, you got to talk about the ride itself, how it made you feel, how it translates into what it was trying to accomplish. For that reason, I would put this ride at 3. I'd put Mummy at 2. I'd put Velocicoaster at 1. There's some of these rides that he selected that I would not even put in the top 20, but he did that, like the glorified people mover that he did, or those several others. I'm just going to skip through real quick. He Rip Rod Rocket. I don't know where he put Rip Rod Rocket, but it was just way too far. Men in Black shouldn't have been so close. Skull Island shouldn't have been so close. I don't know. I mean, to each their own, but thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you haven't seen the Disney version of this, go to the channel and search that up, because it's also fun to see the perspective of the 60. I think there's 60 rides. So, or 40, I forget. There's a lot. So we do all the Disney rides, but you know, this was a different version. It was more about Universal. What is your favorite Universal ride? Let me know below. Subscribe. Till next time. Peace out.